That animal is a ticking time bomb. I wouldn't get within 10 feet of him if I were you, the shelter director warned, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I stood frozen at the entrance to the isolation kennel, my heart pounding against my ribs despite the chill of the concrete building. The Belgian Malinois stared back at me with unnerving intensity, his amber eyes reflecting nothing but focused awareness. Not aggression, not fear, just assessment. That's when I noticed the battered metal tag hanging from his tactical collar. Different from the standard shelter tags, and the 7 words inscribed there changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The county animal shelter on the outskirts of Riverdale wasn't known for housing military working dogs. This facility, with its peeling paint and overtaxed staff, typically processed abandoned pets and local strays. Yet here was this magnificent animal, scarred but dignified, watching me from the furthest kennel, the one reserved for special cases, as Meredith, the shelter director, had euphemistically put it. 8 different families have tried to adopt him in the past year, Meredith continued, keeping a cautious distance from the chain-link door. Each one brought him back within a week. The last family threatened legal action after he cornered their teenage son against a wall. Didn't bite him, just contained him. She shook her head, the fluorescent lights highlighting the stress lines around her eyes. We've run out of options. Tomorrow's his last day with us. I hadn't come to the shelter looking for a dog, much less a washout from a military K9 program. As part of my VA-mandated community service hours, I was supposed to be fixing the shelter's electrical system, faulty wiring that kept tripping breakers whenever they ran the washing machines and dryers simultaneously. A simple job to fulfill. My obligation, sign the papers, and get my therapist off my back for another month. But something about this dog had drawn me away from the utility room. Perhaps it was the distinctive alert posture that reminded me of the K9 units that had patrolled alongside our convoys in Kandahar. Or maybe it was the hushed tone the volunteers used when referring to the dog in isolation, equal parts reverence and fear. "What's his name?" I asked, taking a step closer to the kennel. Meredith consulted her clipboard. "We call him Maverick, but he doesn't respond to it. According to his intake forms, his military designation was Echo 7 Delta. No record of his operational name." The dog's ears twitched at the alphanumeric code, the only indication that he'd registered our conversation at all. "May I?" I gestured toward the kennel door. "At your own risk," Meredith replied with obvious reluctance. "He's not aggressive with staff, just unpredictable, especially with men. We think he may have been abused after his military service." She handed me a slip leash. "If you're determined to go in there, take this, and for God's sake, don't make any sudden movements." The heavy metal door creaked as I swung it open just wide enough to slip through. The dog, Maverick, or whatever his real name might be, remained perfectly still, watching my every move with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. Up close, I could see the map of scars across his muzzle and left flank, some surgical, others jagged and haphazard. Battle wounds, but from which battle? I crouched down slowly, not making eye contact, allowing my body to settle into the familiar posture I'd used countless times with the skittish village dogs in Afghanistan. Not imposing, not retreating, just existing in the same space, respecting boundaries. "Hey there," I said softly, keeping my voice even. "Rough day, huh?" The Malinois tilted his head slightly, his assessment continuing. I noticed his tactical collar then. Not the nylon shelter-issued one I'd expected, but a weathered military-grade band with a small metal tag that had been partially obscured by his fur. Maintaining slow, deliberate movements, I reached out, not to touch him, but to get a better look at the identification. The dog didn't growl, didn't retreat, didn't advance. He simply watched, allowing my careful movement into his space. The tag was custom-made, different from standard military issue. The metal worn, but the engraving still legible. Through shadows we walked together. Remember your promise. 7 words that stopped my breath. 7 words that weren't meant for a shelter worker or casual adopter, but for someone who would understand their significance. Words that could only be meant for a handler who had fought alongside this dog in places where shadows concealed deadly threats. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" I whispered. Something shifted in those amber eyes, not quite recognition, but a subtle change in assessment. The rigid alertness in his posture softened almost imperceptibly. Meredith's voice came from behind me, tense with concern. "Captain Lawson, I really think that's close enough for a first meeting." I hadn't told her I was a captain, hadn't mentioned my military service at all when I'd signed up for the community service program. Civilians usually couldn't distinguish between military ranks. Anyway, I turned slowly, careful not to make sudden movements around the dog. "How did you know my rank?" Her expression changed, caution giving way to something more complex. "It's in your file, the court documents that came with your community service assignment." I nodded, processing this information. The shelter had done their homework on the veterans sent their way, probably standard procedure for an organization regularly dealing with people carrying invisible wounds. As I began to stand, preparing to leave the kennel, something unexpected happened. The Malinois moved, not away from me, but toward me, closing the careful distance I'd maintained. There was no aggression in the movement, no attempt to dominate or threaten. Instead, he simply positioned himself at my side, his shoulder almost but not quite touching my leg, his gaze now fixed on the kennel door rather than on me. The positioning was unmistakable to anyone who had worked with military canines. This wasn't a dog seeking affection or asserting dominance. This was a working dog, assuming operational stance beside a handler. Meredith's eyes widened. "That's unusual. He's never done that with anyone before?" "We recognize each other," I said quietly, the realization settling into my bones with certainty I couldn't yet explain. "Not personally, but we've seen the same things." The dog remained at my side as I carefully stood, maintaining his position with professional precision. I didn't reach to pet him or offer affection. That wasn't what this moment was about. This was something more fundamental, a recognition between 2 warriors who had walked through the same shadows referenced on his tag. "I'd like to know more about him," I said, my community service assignment suddenly secondary to this unexpected connection. "Whatever records you have, whatever his story is." Meredith nodded slowly. "There isn't much. He was found on Highway 16 about a year ago, dehydrated and injured. No microchip, just that collar and tag. The military liaison who examined him confirmed he'd been through K9 training, but said there was no record of an Echo 7 Delta in their active database. Either his records were classified, or they were erased," I finished for her. Working dogs with certain special operations units sometimes existed in administrative grey areas, their records compartmentalized or deliberately obscured. As we exited the kennel, the Malinois maintained perfect heel position beside me, not dragging behind or forging ahead. Meredith watched with undisguised amazement. "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer forming in my mind. "Protocol says we need to proceed with scheduled euthanasia tomorrow," she said, the administrative reality clashing with the scene unfolding before her. Unless someone assumes responsibility for him," I completed her thought. I wasn't looking for a dog, much less one carrying his own combat trauma. My small apartment barely accommodated me and my nightmares, let alone a special operations washout with a mysterious past. My therapist would call this impulsive decision-making, another symptom to document in my file. But as I stood there, the Belgian Malinois maintaining his vigilant position at my side, I knew with absolute certainty that the 7 words on his tag weren't random. Through shadows, we walked together. Remember your promise. Someone had made a promise to this dog, a promise that had been broken when he ended up abandoned on Highway 16. I didn't know what that promise had been, but I recognized the obligation it represented. In the military, we lived and died by the promises we made to each other. This dog had served, had walked through shadows most civilians couldn't imagine, and had been discarded despite someone's solemn word. "I'll take him," I said, the decision crystallizing into certainty. "Whatever his story is, we'll figure it out together." I wasn't always the kind of man who made life-altering decisions on impulse. Before my medical discharge, I was Captain Marcus Lawson, 75th Ranger Regiment, with 12 years of service and 4 deployments. I thrived on structure, planning, and clear objectives. My commanding officers described me as methodical and strategically minded in performance reviews. My teammates trusted me because I never acted without calculating risks and contingencies. Now I was signing adoption papers for a military working dog with behavioral issues severe enough to warrant euthanasia, based on 7 engraved words and a gut feeling I couldn't explain. "You understand what you're taking on here, right?" Meredith asked, as I completed the paperwork in her cluttered office. The Belgian Malinois sat perfectly positioned at my side, his body relaxed but alert. "Maverick, that's not his name," I interrupted, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "What would you prefer to call him?" Her pen hovered over the form. I glanced down at the dog, studying the precise way he held himself, the disciplined focus in his amber eyes. Something clicked into place. "Phantom," I said. "His name is Phantom." The dog's ears twitched forward at the word, his head turning slightly toward me. Meredith raised an eyebrow. "Seems like you might be right about that. How did you know?" I shook my head, unable to explain the inexplicable familiarity. "Just a hunch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The shelter's required home inspection was scheduled for the following day, which gave me exactly 18 hours to transform my Spartan apartment into something that would pass muster for housing a high-drive military dog. I stopped at the pet supply store on the way home, spending nearly half my monthly disability check on appropriate gear. A proper tactical harness to replace the shelter's basic collar, a heavy-duty crate, premium food formulated for working dogs, sturdy toys designed for extreme chewers, and a memory foam bed that the sales associate assured me would support joints stressed by operational demands. My apartment in the outskirts of Riverdale wasn't much, a 1-bedroom unit in a faded complex that had seen better days, with thin walls that did little to muffle the sounds of neighbors' arguments and crying babies. The management allowed pets, with an extra deposit, which I paid without complaint, not mentioning that my new companion was a former military asset with a history of unpredictable behavior. As I unlocked my door, I realized I was holding my breath, suddenly aware of how barren my living space would appear to an outside observer. The furnishings were minimal: a second-hand couch, a coffee table that doubled as my dining surface, a TV I rarely turned on, and a bed that often went unused on nights when nightmares drove me to pace until dawn. No photos adorned the walls, no mementos or keepsakes personalized the space. It was less a home than a way station, a place to exist between mandatory VA appointments and community service assignments. Phantom entered cautiously, his methodical movement revealing his training as he cleared the small apartment room by room, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, before returning to the entryway where I stood watching his assessment. Once. Satisfied, he sat awaiting further instruction. "Well, this is it," I said, gesturing to the sparse surroundings. "Not much, but it's quiet. Mostly." The dog observed me with that same intense focus I'd noticed at the shelter, processing information in a way that seemed almost human in its complexity. I'd worked with military K9s enough to recognize that this was no ordinary service animal. Whatever his specialized training had been, it went well beyond standard explosive detection or patrol functions. I set up his crate in the corner of the living room with the best visibility of both the front door and the bedroom, positioning the memory foam bed inside and leaving the door open. "That's yours," I explained, though I doubted he needed the clarification. "You're free to use it or not." That first evening established a pattern between us. Careful observation, measured, interaction, mutual assessment. I didn't attempt to pet him or solicit affection. He didn't seek it. We existed in parallel, two combat veterans sharing space, each with boundaries the other instinctively recognized. When I prepared my simple dinner, baked chicken and microwaved vegetables, I portioned some plain meat for Phantom, placing it in a stainless steel bowl alongside his kibble. He waited for my nod before approaching the food, eating with the efficient precision characteristic of working dogs. Night brought the first real test of our arrangement. I'd grown accustomed to my solitary struggles with insomnia and nightmares. The cold sweats, the muffled shouts, the hours spent sitting in the shower with scalding water, attempting to wash away memories that clung like desert sand. How would these episodes affect a dog potentially carrying his own combat trauma? The answer came at 2:17 a.m. when the familiar nightmare jolted me awake. The convoy, the hidden IED, the blinding flash, and the sickening realization that I couldn't reach my team in time. I gasped awake to find Phantom standing beside my bed, his posture alert but calm, those amber eyes fixed on my face with an expression that contained neither fear nor judgment, only steady assessment. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't attempt physical contact. He simply maintained his position, a silent sentinel, acknowledging the battle being fought in my mind while standing ready to assist if needed. "I'm okay," I whispered, the tremor in my voice betraying the lie. Phantom made no response beyond a subtle shift that brought him slightly closer to the bed, not crowding my space, but making his presence more tangible. The unexpected companionship in that vulnerable moment cracked something open inside me. For 2 years since my medical discharge, I'd isolated myself from the concern of well-meaning friends and family, unable to articulate the jumbled mess of guilt, rage, and grief that accompanied my survival when others hadn't made it home. I'd endured mandated therapy sessions with stoic resistance, going through motions without meaningful engagement. Yet somehow, the silent presence of this dog, this fellow warrior with his own untold story, penetrated defensive walls that human connection hadn't breached. "We're quite the pair, aren't we?" I said softly. Phantom's ears twitched, his gaze unwavering. By morning I'd managed another 2 hours of fitful sleep, more than I typically achieved after a nightmare episode. Phantom had eventually settled on the floor beside my bed, not touching but close enough that I could hear his steady breathing, an auditory anchor that helped quiet my racing thoughts. The home inspection was scheduled for 11 a.m. I spent the early morning hours clearing away empty takeout containers, doing a hasty load of laundry, and attempting to make my apartment look like the dwelling of a functional human being, rather than a way station for a ghost. Phantom observed these preparations with patient attention, occasionally repositioning himself to maintain sight lines to the door and windows, a security habit I recognized from my own hyper-vigilant behaviors. Meredith arrived precisely on time, clipboard in hand, her professional demeanor tempered by genuine concern. "How was the first night?" she asked as I invited her in. Uneventful, I replied, the partial truth easier than explaining the nocturnal connection that had formed between man and dog. Her inspection was thorough but not invasive, checking that basic needs were met while respecting the obvious signs of my private nature. She noted Phantom's crate setup with approval, examined the quality of food and supplies I'd purchased, and observed the dog's relaxed but alert demeanor with evident surprise. "I've never seen him this calm in a new environment," she admitted, making notes on her clipboard. Previous adopters reported extreme anxiety, destructive behaviors, even escape attempts within the first 24 hours. I glanced at Phantom, who had maintained perfect downstay position since Meredith's arrival, his eyes tracking her movements without apparent stress. "Maybe he just needed the right environment," I suggested. Meredith's expression turned thoughtful, or the right person. She hesitated, then added, "Captain Lawson, I should tell you that we did attempt to contact military channels about this dog when he was first brought in. The responses were inconsistent. One liaison said no such dog existed in their records. Another suggested his unit designation belonged to a special operations group that had been decommissioned. A third told us rather bluntly to stop asking questions. The information didn't surprise me. Certain military working dogs, especially those attached to classified operations, existed in bureaucratic shadows. Their training, deployment records, and even their very existence sometimes officially denied. "What else can you tell me about when he was found?" I asked. "Highway patrol officer spotted him on the shoulder of Route 16, about 20 miles east of here. He was dehydrated, had several untreated wounds, including what appeared to be a bullet, graze along his right flank." Meredith consulted her notes. The officer reported that the dog approached his vehicle directly and sat beside the passenger door as if expecting to be transported. No aggression, no hesitation. Just got in when the door was opened and sat at attention for the entire ride to the station. The behavior pattern painted a clear picture. A working dog separated from his handler, following protocol for unexpected contingencies. Military canines were trained to seek out authority figures in uniform if separated from their teams. The highway patrol officer's uniform would have been close enough to trigger this training response, and no one came looking for him? No missing canine reports from any military installations? Meredith shook her head. "None that we could find. It's like he appeared out of nowhere." As she completed her inspection, approving my adoption with only minor recommendations for additional enrichment activities, Meredith paused at the door. "There's one more thing. The veterinarian who examined him when he first arrived noted something unusual. This dog has received advanced medical care at some point, evidence of surgical procedures that go well beyond standard military veterinary services. Titanium pins in his left rear leg, synthetic grafts on previously damaged tendons, the kind of specialized treatment usually reserved for, well, for human special forces operators." The information settled like a weight in my chest. Another piece of an increasingly complex puzzle. Whatever Phantom's operational history had been, he'd been considered valuable enough to receive cutting-edge medical interventions, then somehow expendable enough to end up abandoned on a highway, scheduled for euthanasia in a county shelter. After Meredith left, I knelt beside Phantom, looking directly into those intelligent eyes. "What happened to you?" I asked quietly. "And what was the promise someone made?" The dog held my gaze, the depths of his amber eyes containing secrets I could only begin to imagine. The tag on his collar caught the light, those 7 words glinting like a code I was now committed to deciphering. Through shadows we walked together. "Remember your promise." The following days revealed patterns in Phantom's behavior that told me far more about his training than any official documentation could have provided. His movements through the apartment were precise and deliberate, each room entry preceded by a momentary pause at the threshold, a tactical assessment before committing to a new space. When I showered, he positioned himself directly outside the bathroom door, his body oriented toward the apartment entrance. During meal preparations, he maintained a perfect downstay with full visibility of both me and the front door. These weren't the habits of a standard military working dog trained for basic explosive detection or patrol functions. This was specialized behavior, the kind I'd observed in elite multi-purpose K9s attached to special operations units. What puzzled me most was Phantom's response to certain environmental triggers. The backfiring car that sent me diving for cover barely registered with him. The thunderstorm that rattled windows and triggered flashbacks for me left him completely unfazed, yet the specific electronic chime of my microwave would send him into instant alert posture, ears forward, muscles tensed. The rhythmic tapping of my neighbor's leaky faucet through our shared wall would cause him to pace in precise 6-foot patterns, his attention fixed on the sound source. On our third morning together, I decided to test a theory. During my time with the Rangers, I'd worked alongside several specialized K9 teams, including those trained in advanced communication protocols. Taking a seat at my small kitchen table, I deliberately positioned my hands in a specific configuration, fingers splayed in a pattern that, to the uninitiated, would look like meaningless fidgeting. Phantom's reaction was immediate. He transitioned from relaxed observation to working posture, his entire demeanor shifting from companion animal to operational asset. His eyes fixed on my hands with laser focus, awaiting further instruction. "You're not just any military dog, are you?" I murmured, carefully adjusting my hand position to include a subtle thumb tap, the signal to stand down. Phantom immediately relaxed his posture, though his attentive gaze remained. The response confirmed my suspicion. He'd been trained in advanced tactical sign language, a specialized communication system developed for operations where verbal commands were impractical or dangerous. I reached for my laptop, opening a private browser window. My military connections were limited since my discharge, but I still had contact with Jackson Chen, a former intelligence analyst now working as a cybersecurity consultant. If anyone could discreetly navigate the labyrinthine record systems of specialized military programs, it was Chen. My message was deliberately vague. Need info on a unique asset. Designation Echo 7 Delta, connected to Shadow Operations circa 2019-2021. Nothing official, just personal closure. Secure channel preferred. While waiting for a response, I decided to take Phantom for his first neighborhood walk. The tactical harness I'd purchased fit him perfectly, providing control without restricting his movement. As we stepped outside, his operational demeanor intensified, head slightly elevated, gaze systematically scanning our surroundings, body positioned precisely at my left side. The veterans' apartment complex where I lived wasn't in the best part of Riverdale. Abandoned storefronts lined the main street, evidence of the economic downturn that had hit the region hard after the manufacturing plant closure 5 years earlier. Most residents kept to themselves, many sharing the invisible burden of combat experiences that separated them from civilian society. We had barely reached the corner when I noticed Phantom's subtle change in posture, a slight stiffening, a fractional repositioning that placed his body more directly between me and the approaching figure. 3 doors down, Mike Collins, a former Marine with a prosthetic leg and a known tendency toward alcohol-fueled outbursts, was emerging from his apartment, movements unsteady despite the early hour. I'd had limited interaction with Collins since moving in 6 months earlier. Our exchanges had been civil but distant, the mutual recognition of fellow veterans who respected privacy and personal demons. Today, however, his bloodshot eyes locked onto Phantom with unexpected intensity. "Military dog," Collins stated, his voice carrying the gravel of both whiskey and emotion. "Belgian Malinois, special ops by the look of him." I tensed, uncertain how to navigate this encounter. "Just adopted him," I replied neutrally. Collins took an uneven step closer, and Phantom's posture shifted again, not aggressive, but decidedly protective. The change wasn't lost on Collins, whose weathered face cracked into an unexpected smile. "Easy, warrior," he said, not to me, but directly to Phantom. "I recognize your kind." He glanced up at me. "Was attached to a K9 unit for 3 months in Helmand. Best operators in the field. Weren't the two-legged kind." The shared reference to deployment territory created an immediate bridge, the unspoken understanding that exists between those who have experienced the same harsh landscapes. "You worked with dogs like him?" I asked. Collins's expression darkened, momentarily. "Not exactly like him. This one's different." He studied Phantom with the assessing gaze of someone with specialized knowledge. The way he positions, the eye movement patterns. This isn't just any military dog. This is top tier, specialized. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I admitted. He came with minimal background information. Collins nodded slowly, the gesture containing multitudes of understanding about classified operations and the gaps they left in official records. "There were rumors in my last deployment," he said carefully, "about a specialized K9 program. Dogs trained beyond the usual parameters, complex decision-making, autonomous operation capability, advanced medical, augmentation. Most of us thought it was just field talk, like the stories about secret bunkers and experimental weapons systems." He fixed me with a suddenly clearer gaze. "Until a sandstorm separated our unit from the main convoy, and we ended up pinned down by insurgent fire with 3 critically wounded Marines. I waited, sensing there was more to the story. Radio was down, GPS scrambled, no way to call for extraction or medical support." Collins' voice had taken on the distant quality that accompanied combat recollection. "Then this dog appears out. Of nowhere, Belgian Malinois, tactical vest, no handler in sight, moves directly to the wounded Marines, indicates a direction with clear intention. Our lieutenant makes the call to follow. The dog led you out," I concluded. Collins nodded. "Not just out. Directly to a hidden medical outpost we didn't even know existed. 3 kilometers across territory we would have avoided if we'd had functional navigation. That dog knew exactly where to go, made tactical decisions about route selection that showed understanding beyond training parameters." He paused. "When the dust settled and we tried to get information about the K9 unit, we hit classified barriers at every turn. Eventually got word from a sympathetic intelligence officer that our incident report had been flagged and redirected to something called Project Umbra." The name triggered a faint recognition. A passing reference in a classified briefing, quickly redirected. Nothing substantive, just the impression of a highly compartmentalized program, even by special operations standards. Collins was looking at Phantom with renewed intensity. "If I were betting man, I'd say your new friend here isn't just any military washout. The way he moves, the assessment patterns, this is an Umbra dog." When we returned to the apartment, I found a secured message from Chen waiting on my laptop. "Information severely restricted. E7D designation belongs to Classified Biometric Enhancement Program. All records officially redacted. Unofficially connected to something called Umbra Initiative. Extremely sensitive. Source suggests medical, neural augmentation involved. Recommendation: proceed with extreme caution. Location data indicates program. Termination approximately 18 months ago following congressional inquiry." Assets allegedly decommissioned or reassigned. Chen out. The cryptic message aligned too perfectly with Collins's account to be coincidental. I studied Phantom as he conducted his now familiar security circuit of the apartment, noting the surgical precision of his movements, the analytical quality of his environmental assessment. The implications were both fascinating and disturbing. This wasn't just a highly trained military working dog, but potentially something more advanced, an animal whose natural capabilities had been systematically enhanced through cutting-edge technology and specialized conditioning. The mystery deepened when I examined Phantom's tactical collar more carefully that evening. The worn metal had subtle seams I hadn't initially noticed, suggesting compartments or components beyond simple identification. The material itself was unusual, lighter than standard steel, but with similar durability. Along the inner surface, barely visible when the collar was positioned normally, was a sequence of micro-perforations arranged in patterns too precise to be manufacturing artifacts. I carefully removed the collar to examine it more thoroughly, noting Phantom's immediate attention to my actions. The tag with its enigmatic message, "Through shadows we walk together. Remember your promise," was attached via a specialized locking mechanism rather than a standard ring. When tilted at a specific angle, faint marks became visible along the edge, not scratches from wear, but deliberately inscribed microtexts, too small to read without magnification. My military training had included recognition of specialized equipment, including covert communication devices and non-standard identification systems. What I was seeing matched none of the standard protocols, but suggested a level of technological sophistication consistent with highly classified programs. Using my phone's camera at maximum magnification, I captured images of the microtexts, then slowly reassembled the collar and returned it to Phantom, who had observed the entire process with attentive patience. That night, as I examined the enlarged images on my laptop, the tiny inscriptions became clearer. Umbra Asset 7D Phantom, Handler, Auth, Kane D, Protocol Oversight, Monarch Division. A name, not just a designation or a unit, but an actual handler identification. Kane. The first concrete lead to Phantom's past, to the person who had walked through shadows with him, who had made a promise now inscribed on his collar. As I processed this discovery, Phantom moved from his usual observation position to sit directly beside my chair, his amber eyes fixed on the screen displaying his enlarged collar inscription. The intelligence in that gaze seemed to transcend normal animal cognition, a depth of awareness that lent credence to the unsettling implications of biometric enhancement mentioned in Chen's message. "We're going to find out what happened to you," I promised quietly, "and who Kane is." For the first time since his adoption, Phantom broke his disciplined reserve, leaning his substantial weight gently against my leg, not seeking comfort, but offering connection. The simple contact conveyed more than words could have expressed: recognition, trust, and perhaps something approaching hope. The gesture cemented my resolve. Whatever Project Umbra had been, whatever enhancements Phantom had received, whatever promise had been made and broken, I was now committed to uncovering the full story, not just for closure or curiosity, but because this extraordinary animal deserved to have his truth acknowledged. As if sensing my determination, Phantom straightened, resuming his alert posture. His eyes held mine with that uncanny intelligence, and in that moment of connection, I understood that our partnership was evolving beyond simple adoption or rehabilitation. We were becoming a team, bound by shared military experience, and now, by a common mission, to uncover the shadowed past that had led him to Highway 16 and ultimately to me. Riverdale wasn't a place that welcomed scrutiny. The small industrial city had weathered economic collapse when the manufacturing plants closed, leaving behind empty warehouses and a population divided between those who couldn't afford to leave and those who had nowhere else to go. Many residents maintained a deliberate distance from official channels. Veterans with untreated PTSD, former workers with chronic injuries sustained on factory floors, families one missed payment away from eviction. This collective wariness created an environment where questions about military operations or classified programs were met with closed doors and averted gazes. My apartment complex, the ironically named Sunrise Gardens, housed predominantly veterans, many of us placed there through VA housing assistance programs. The aging two-story buildings formed a horseshoe around a central courtyard where the promised gardens had long since surrendered to patchy grass and resilient weeds. What the complex lacked in aesthetics, it compensated for in tacit understanding. Neighbors who recognized the signs of nightmares and flashbacks, who didn't react to hypervigilance or sudden mood shifts, who understood why some residents slept with lights on or needed to sit with their backs to walls in communal spaces. 2 days after discovering the microtext on Phantom's collar, I encountered Benjamin West in the building's laundry room. West was a former Army intelligence specialist in his early 60s who rarely engaged with other residents beyond cursory nods. His left arm ended just below the elbow, and rumors suggested classified operations in regions the U.S. military officially never entered. He supported himself through remote data analysis work that required minimal interaction with others, the perfect occupation for someone who valued anonymity and independence. West's reaction to Phantom was immediate and unmistakable. The moment we entered the laundry room, his posture shifted from relaxed to alert, his eyes focusing on the Belgian Malinois with professional assessment rather than casual curiosity. "New companion?" he asked, his tone deliberately neutral. "Recent adoption," I replied, matching his carefully modulated voice. "Shelter special." West's gaze flickered to Phantom's tactical collar, then back to my face. "Interesting choice of equipment for a shelter dog." The underlying message was clear. He recognized military-grade gear when he saw it. I decided to test the waters. Previous owner left some specialized equipment with him. Seemed a shame not to use it. West nodded slowly, loading his last batch of laundry before turning back to us. Specialized equipment tends to serve specific purposes, sometimes carries unexpected functionality. The deliberate emphasis suggested knowledge, beyond casual observation. I glanced around the empty laundry room, confirming our privacy before responding. "You recognize this type of equipment?" "Let's say I've encountered similar items in professional contexts." West hesitated, then added, "If you're interested in understanding its full capabilities, you might find it worthwhile to examine it." Under ultraviolet light, certain programs used photoreactive markers for tracking and identification. The information was offered casually, but the implication was significant. West hadn't just recognized military equipment, he had specific knowledge about covert identification protocols. I filed this information carefully, maintaining a neutral expression. "Thanks for the suggestion. Always good to know what you're working with." As we prepared to leave, West spoke again, his voice lowered despite the empty room. "Captain Lawson, a word of advice from someone who's navigated sensitive waters. Some questions lead to attention you might not want, particularly regarding certain enhancements developed for specialized assets." The deliberate reference to my rank and the mention of enhancements, the exact term Chen had used in his message, confirmed my suspicion that West's knowledge wasn't coincidental. "I'm just trying to understand what I've taken responsibility for," I replied carefully. West nodded. "Understandable. If you're determined to proceed, you might want to speak with Dr. Elena Reyes at the VA Medical Center. Specialized veterinary consultant. Tell her Benjamin sent you regarding photoreactive markers. She'll understand. That evening I followed West's suggestion, examining Phantom's collar under the UV flashlight I kept in my emergency kit. The results were startling. Under ultraviolet illumination, the collar revealed intricate patterns, invisible in normal light. What had appeared to be simple wear patterns transformed into deliberate markings, a systematic code of lines, dots, and geometric shapes wrapping around the entire collar surface. More significantly, when the light passed across Phantom's shoulders and spine, faint lines became visible beneath his fur, surgical scars so precisely executed they were imperceptible under normal examination. The patterns matched the technical diagrams I'd occasionally glimpsed in classified briefings discussing neural interface technology, experimental systems designed to enhance communication between human operators and technical equipment. Except these markings weren't on a human operative, but on a military working dog. The implications were both fascinating and disturbing. The theoretical applications of such technology had been discussed in specialized journals: enhanced sensory processing, remote operational capability, accelerated response conditioning. The practical implementation, however, remained classified at the highest levels, with many assuming the technology remained theoretical rather than deployed. The following morning, I contacted the VA Medical Center to schedule an appointment with Dr. Elena Reyes, only to be informed that no such person existed in their system. This contradiction between West's specific referral and official records suggested exactly the kind of administrative compartmentalization I'd encountered in special operations. Personnel who officially didn't exist while performing essential functions within classified programs. My next community service shift at the animal shelter provided an unexpected opportunity to gather more information. Meredith introduced me to Dr. Andrew Coleman, the veterinarian who had initially examined Phantom upon his arrival at the shelter. Coleman was a reserved man in his 50s, with the careful movements of someone accustomed to handling anxious animals. His expression remained professionally neutral when I mentioned Phantom, but a subtle tension in his posture suggested more than clinical interest. "Remarkable animal," he commented as we discussed routine maintenance of the shelter's medical equipment, my assigned task for the day. "I've examined thousands of dogs over my career, but never one with that particular physiological profile." "Physiological profile?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational while continuing to check the autoclave's functionality. Coleman hesitated, glancing toward the door to ensure our privacy. The scarring patterns were unusual, precision work, not typical veterinary procedure, and his neurological responses during basic examination showed anomalies I couldn't account for with standard medical training. He lowered his voice slightly. "I sent tissue and blood samples to a university colleague for analysis. The results were unexpected enough that my colleague called rather than sending a written report. Enhanced cellular regeneration, atypical neurotransmitter levels, evidence of synthetic protein markers associated with experimental treatment protocols." "Sounds like advanced research," I observed carefully. "Beyond advanced," Coleman replied. "The markers matched prohibited research parameters, the kind that require special congressional oversight exemptions, military application only." He studied me with renewed intensity. "You're not just any adopter, are you, Captain Lawson?" The direct reference to my military rank, information I hadn't shared with the shelter staff beyond Meredith, confirmed my growing suspicion that Phantom's presence in Riverdale had created ripples in certain circles, activating networks that operated beneath the surface of ordinary community life. "I'm trying to understand what I've adopted," I said simply, "and maybe who's looking for him." Coleman's expression shifted subtly. When those tissue samples were analyzed, my university colleague received an unusual response. The day after submitting the results to her department head, she was visited by individuals identifying themselves as military research oversight personnel. They confiscated all samples and data, citing national security protocols. He paused. 2 days later, I received a call from someone who didn't identify themselves. Beyond a project designation, Umbra Containment Division. They asked detailed questions about the dog's location and who had shown interest in him. The information sent a chill through me. When was this? 3 months ago. Shortly after, the adoption attempts began. 7 different applicants, in rapid succession, none with prior shelter adoption history, all meeting specific demographic profiles consistent with cover identities. Each adoption failed when the dog exhibited behaviors that necessitated return. Coleman's gaze was steady. I don't believe those failures were accidental or related to behavioral issues. I believe that dog was selecting or rejecting potential handlers based on criteria beyond our understanding. The implication was staggering that Phantom's behavioral problems had been deliberate assessments, that the multiple failed adoptions represented his active rejection of handlers who didn't meet specific criteria. This would require cognitive capabilities and autonomous decision-making far beyond standard canine parameters. What happened when you reported these suspicions? I asked. I didn't, Coleman admitted. My colleague's experience suggested that official channels might not be the safest avenue. Instead, I contacted an old classmate who consults for DARPA on ethical applications of bioengineering. Without specifics, I described the physiological anomalies. Her response was immediate. Terminate. Inquiry, destroy all records. Refer to Oversight Committee Alpha 7 if contacted by field assets. He shook his head. I've known her for 30 years. I've never heard that level of concern in her voice. Our conversation was interrupted by Meredith's arrival, bringing routine paperwork that required Coleman's signature. As the veterinarian turned his attention to administrative matters, he added one final comment, pitched for my ears alone. If I were responsible for an asset like that, I'd verify the integrity of all tracking systems, particularly subcutaneous transponders. Standard frequencies can be monitored. The warning was clear. If Phantom carried internal tracking technology, as his enhanced physiology suggested, our movements might be monitored by whoever had originally created him. The protective instinct that had led me to adopt him intensified. With this new information, whatever Phantom was, whatever programs had created him, he had chosen me after rejecting multiple other potential handlers. That choice deserved respect and protection. That evening, as Phantom conducted his usual security circuit of the apartment, I noticed him pause near the kitchen window, his attention fixed on something outside. Following his gaze, I observed a nondescript sedan parked across the street. Not unusual in itself, except that the vehicle had been in the same position during our morning walk, despite parking regulations that prohibited extended stays in that area. Phantom's focused attention and slight change in posture suggested recognition, rather than general alert status. He knew that vehicle, or perhaps whoever occupied it. The observer had become the observed, and in that moment I understood that our investigation into Phantom's origins might have accelerated a timeline we weren't yet prepared to confront. "Looks like we've attracted attention," I said quietly. Phantom's eyes met mine, that remarkable intelligence apparent in his gaze. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The captain and the dog who walked through shadows, now united in navigating the mysteries of Project Umbra and the promise inscribed on his collar. The nondescript sedan continued its surveillance. For 3 days, maintaining careful distance while following our routines around Riverdale. Different drivers rotated shifts, a woman with short grey hair and sunglasses, a middle-aged man in a windbreaker who favoured the driver's side window slightly open regardless of weather, and a younger individual whose military posture was evident. Even behind the wheel, professional surveillance, not harassment, observation without immediate intervention. On the 4th morning, I made a tactical decision. Instead of continuing our predictable neighborhood walks, Phantom and I left the apartment at 4:30 a.m., well before sunrise, and took an unfamiliar route that led us to the abandoned Riverdale manufacturing complex on the city's eastern edge. The sprawling facility had once employed over 2,000 workers producing automotive components. Now, it stood as a hollow monument to economic collapse. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, chain-link fences with prominent no trespassing signs, largely ignored by local teenagers seeking adventure. The surveillance sedan was nowhere in sight as we approached the complex, suggesting we'd successfully evaded our observers, at least temporarily. My intention wasn't to hide indefinitely, but to create space for an unmonitored test of phantoms, a specialized training. If Dr. Coleman's assessment was accurate, if Phantom possessed enhanced capabilities beyond standard military K9 parameters, I needed to understand those capabilities before confronting whoever was tracking us. The manufacturing complex's main building housed an enormous production floor, now empty of machinery but still offering the complex spatial environment I needed. Multiple entry points, varied elevation levels, separate rooms with different acoustic properties, ideal for testing specialized sensory and tactical responses. I'd chosen this location deliberately, having scouted it during my initial weeks in Riverdale, when restlessness and hypervigilance had me exploring potential escape routes and defensive positions throughout the city. Phantom moved beside me with heightened alertness, his operational demeanor intensifying as we entered the unfamiliar environment. His systematic scanning of our surroundings, the precise positioning that maintained optimal protective coverage while preserving mobility options. These weren't trained behaviors, but tactical thinking, ongoing environmental assessment, and response planning. I led us to the center of the main production floor, where dawn light filtered through broken skylights, creating pools of visibility amid persistent shadows. Here, with clear sight lines in all directions and multiple acoustic barriers, I could test Phantom's capabilities with minimal risk of observation. "Phantom," I said quietly, his name now functioning as both identity and operational cue. "Security assessment, full spectrum." The command was improvised, not part of standard military K9 protocols, but my instinct suggested that an enhanced asset would be trained to interpret complex directives rather than relying on fixed command sets. Phantom's response confirmed this hypothesis. He immediately began a systematic survey of our environment, moving in expanding concentric circles from our position, investigating not just obvious entry points, but also ventilation ducts, structural weak points, and acoustic vulnerabilities. His assessment completed, he returned to my position and performed a behavior I'd never witnessed in any military working dog. He used his paw to draw a rudimentary map in the dust covering the concrete floor. The scratched lines clearly indicated entry points with deeper marks signifying higher risk areas. He then positioned himself to indicate direction, facing the northwest corner of the building, where a partially collapsed mezzanine created the most significant tactical vulnerability. The demonstration confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Phantom wasn't just trained to detect threats, but to communicate complex spatial information to his handler. This capability transcended standard K9 parameters, suggesting cognitive processing, closer to human tactical analysis than animal instinct. "Impressive," I acknowledged, crouching to examine his dust map more closely. "What else can you show me?" Phantom tilted his head slightly, the gesture surprisingly human in its indication of consideration. Then, with deliberate movement, he approached a pile of discarded materials in the corner, broken pallet wood, metal scraps, tattered plastic sheeting, and began a careful selection process. Using his mouth and paws with surgical precision, he arranged specific items in a pattern that gradually took recognizable form. The rough outline of a human figure positioned prone behind structural coverage, with smaller elements indicating approach vectors and fields of fire. The display wasn't just communication, it was strategic scenario construction, the kind of three-dimensional modeling used in special operations planning. I'd seen similar techniques in advanced training, for rangers preparing for complex extraction missions, but never executed by a non-human operator. "You're not just delivering information," I said quietly, the realization settling with profound implications. "You're proposing tactical approaches." Phantom's attention remained fixed on his constructed scenario, adding refinements that suggested contingency planning for variable conditions. The cognitive sophistication required for such modeling far exceeded even the most advanced conventional K-9 training. This wasn't just an enhanced military working dog. This was something approaching partnership-level operational thinking. As I studied the tactical scenario Phantom had constructed, pieces of the puzzle began connecting. The specialized collar with embedded technology, the surgical enhancements evident under UV light, the extraordinary cognitive capabilities now on display, all pointed toward a program far more advanced than anything publicly acknowledged in military working dog development. "Project Umbra," I said aloud, testing Phantom's reaction to the designation. His response was immediate and unmistakable, full attention, alert posture, ears forward in focused anticipation. The name clearly held operational significance for him. I proceeded carefully, watching for response patterns. Handler, Kane. Again, clear recognition. A subtle shift in posture, a momentary softening of vigilance suggesting positive association, rather than threat response. Monarch Division. This trigger produced the most dramatic reaction yet. Phantom immediately executed a precise sequence of movements. 3 steps forward, quarter turn, sitting position with head at specific angle. The behavior pattern was so deliberate, so precisely executed, that it could only be a programmed response, a verification protocol or authentication sequence. "You're confirming your identity," I realized aloud. "That's a verification code, isn't it?" Phantom maintained the positioned posture, waiting. Instinctively, I recognized that the sequence required completion, my response to his authentication. But what response would confirm authorization to an asset from a classified program I knew almost nothing about? I considered the limited information available, the inscription on his collar tag, the microtext identification, the behavioral patterns I'd observed. "Through shadows we walked together," I recited carefully, watching for reaction. "Remember your promise." The effect was electric. Phantom immediately transitioned from formal verification posture to an entirely new behavioral mode. Direct approach, deliberate eye contact, and then something extraordinary. He placed his paw precisely on my chest over my heart, maintaining steady pressure with careful control of force. The gesture wasn't random affection, but deliberate communication. In that moment of connection, something fundamental shifted between us, no longer shelter dog and reluctant adopter, nor even military asset and handler, but partners recognizing each other across the divide of species and experience. Whatever promise had been inscribed on his collar, my acknowledgement of it had activated a deeper operational protocol than anything I'd anticipated. "Okay," I said quietly, maintaining the connection. "We've established trust. Now we need to understand what happened to you, who's looking for you, and what promise was made. Phantom removed his paw and executed another unexpected behavior. Using his teeth, he carefully gripped his collar near the tag and pulled, not to remove it, but to direct my attention to a specific section I hadn't previously examined in detail. The underside of the main collar band, where it would rest against his neck, contained a barely perceptible seam. Following his guidance, I carefully examined the area, discovering a concealed compartment integrated into the collar's structure. The mechanism was sophisticated, not simply a hidden pocket, but a sealed chamber with environmental protection. Opening it required precisely applied pressure at specific points, suggesting intentional design to prevent accidental discovery. Inside the compartment was a small data storage device, no larger than my thumbnail, matte black, with no visible markings or connection ports. Military-grade secure storage, designed for maximum data protection with minimal physical profile. I recognized the technology from specialized equipment briefings, quantum-encrypted micro-storage used for the most sensitive intelligence operations. This is what they're looking for, I realized aloud. Not just you, but what you're carrying. Phantom's focused attention confirmed my assessment. Whatever this storage device contained, it represented information valuable enough to justify the sophisticated surveillance operation currently searching for us. Information connected to Project Umbra, to Handler Kane, to whatever promise had been made and apparently broken. The question now was how to access this data without specialized equipment, and more importantly, whether doing so would trigger embedded security protocols that might alert whoever was searching for us. Standard military data security included remote monitoring of access attempts with automated notification systems for unauthorized decryption efforts. As I carefully secured the storage device in my pocket and resealed the collar compartment, a distant sound caught my attention. Car engines approaching the manufacturing complex. Phantom had already registered the threat, his posture shifting to alert status, attention fixed on the main entrance approximately 200 yards from our position. Through the broken windows, I could see two vehicles entering the property. The familiar surveillance sedan, now accompanied by a black SUV with tinted windows. Our evasion timetable had just accelerated significantly. "Time to move," I said quietly, gathering our minimal equipment. "Alternate exit options?" Phantom immediately took point, leading me toward the east side of the building, where a collapsed section of wall provided concealed departure without using established doorways, likely to be covered by the approaching team. His route selection demonstrated not just familiarity with tactical movement, but anticipatory planning, choosing paths that maximize cover while preserving multiple contingency options. As we navigated through the manufacturing complex toward freedom, I realized we had achieved our first significant breakthrough, not just in understanding Phantom's extraordinary capabilities, but in establishing the trust necessary for genuine partnership. The data storage device in my pocket might contain answers about Project Umbra and Handler Kane, but the most important discovery had been the connection formed in that dusty factory floor. Whatever came next, whoever was approaching in those vehicles, we would face it together, no longer as separate entities, but as a team forged in mutual recognition. The promise inscribed on Phantom's collar now extended to both of us, a commitment to walk together through whatever shadows lay ahead. Phantom's escape route led us through a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the manufacturing complex, emerging half a mile away in an overgrown drainage culvert. The engineering knowledge required to identify this unconventional exit exceeded standard military working dog capabilities, suggesting either prior familiarity with the facility or unprecedented environmental analysis skills. By the time we surfaced, dawn had fully broken, casting long shadows across Riverdale's eastern district. Instead of returning directly to my apartment, now presumably under surveillance, we made our way to the one location in Riverdale unlikely to draw immediate attention, the public library. The aging three-story building opened at 7 a.m. to accommodate early computer users, many of them job seekers without home internet access. Among these determined individuals, a veteran and his service dog would attract minimal notice. "We need information," I told Phantom as we approached the library's side entrance, designated for accessibility, and a secure way to access that storage device. Riverdale Public Library's technological resources were modest but crucial to our immediate needs: free Wi-Fi, public computers with basic USB ports, and most importantly, minimal security oversight. The morning librarian, an elderly woman named Margaret, who had staffed the reference desk for over 40 years, simply nodded at my explanation that Phantom was a service dog for PTSD management. No documentation requested, no questions about his tactical harness or alertness that exceeded typical therapy animal behavior. I selected a computer station in the far corner with clear sightlines to all entrances, positioned Phantom in guard orientation, and began researching our options for accessing specialized, encrypted storage. Conventional approaches would be useless. The device lacked standard connection ports, and attempting brute force decryption would likely trigger security protocols. We needed specialized knowledge about Project Umbra's data management systems. 2 hours of careful research yielded minimal useful information. Project Umbra maintained no public footprint, even in the specialized forums where classified program leaks occasionally surfaced. Monarch Division appeared in exactly one redacted congressional budget document from 2019, referenced only as Specialized Asset Management Program, with all funding details obscured. The trail was deliberately designed to be untraceable by conventional means. As frustration mounted, Phantom suddenly shifted position, his attention focused on the library's main entrance, where a new arrival had appeared. A tall woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun. Her movements conveyed military precision despite civilian clothing, and her eyes conducted a rapid security assessment of the space before settling directly on our position. Dr. Elena Reyes, the VA medical specialist West had mentioned, who officially didn't exist in the VA system. She approached our location directly, maintaining casual appearance while clearly executing a tactical approach, angled pathway providing minimal exposure, hands visible to indicate non-hostile intent, measured pace suggesting confidence rather than urgency. "Captain Lawson," she said quietly when she reached our station. "And Phantom, I see Benjamin's message reached you." I maintained neutral posture while assessing threat level. "Dr. Reyes, interesting to meet someone who doesn't exist in official records." A thin smile acknowledged the understated challenge. "Official records have significant limitations. May I join you?" I gestured to the adjacent chair, noting Phantom's reaction, alert but not defensive, suggesting recognition without threat association. "You knew we'd be here." "I knew you'd need secure access for quantum-encrypted micro-storage," she replied, glancing meaningfully at my pocket where the device remained concealed, "and that Riverdale's limited resources would lead you to public internet access. Finding you was simple pattern analysis." The direct reference to the storage device confirmed my suspicion that Dr. Reyes possessed specific knowledge about Project Umbra. Knowledge that might prove essential for accessing the encrypted data without triggering security protocols. "And if you could find us through pattern analysis," I began. "Others will shortly," she completed my thought. "The team currently searching the manufacturing complex has deployment parameters that will expand to secondary locations within approximately 40 minutes. We should conclude our business before then." Her casual reference to the surveillance team's operational timeline suggested either inside knowledge or direct connection to whoever had dispatched them. Either possibility presented significant risk, "Why should I trust you?" I asked directly. She turned her attention to Phantom. "Ask your partner. Military working dogs with Umbra enhancements have specific recognition protocols for program personnel. If I were unauthorized, he would have already indicated threat status." Phantom's relaxed vigilance confirmed her assertion. He maintained alert status, but showed none of the specific indicators I'd observed when he perceived genuine threats. Whatever Dr. Reyes's connection to Project Umbra, Phantom had categorized her as non-hostile. "You were involved with the program," I stated rather than asked. "Chief Medical Officer, Monarch Division, 2017 through program termination in 2022, she confirmed. "I supervised implementation of all biometric enhancements and neural augmentation protocols, including those applied to subject designation Echo 7 Delta." Her eyes moved to Phantom, with clinical assessment tempered by something resembling regret. "He represents the most advanced integration of our capabilities, the culmination of 5 years of research and development." The frank disclosure suggested urgency beyond normal operational security. "Why tell me this now?" "Because Phantom has selected you as his partner, which means you've somehow triggered his contingency protocols, and because what he carries is significantly more important than program security classifications." She leaned forward slightly. "Captain Lawson, I need to be absolutely clear. That storage device contains information that could save lives or end them, depending on who accesses it. Its encryption is keyed to specific biometric signatures from authorized personnel. Without proper authentication, any access attempt will trigger complete data purge." The warning was delivered without dramatic emphasis, yet conveyed absolute certainty. "Whose biometric signature is required?" "Primary authorization. Commander Daniel Kane, Phantom's original handler and program director. Secondary authorization. Any Monarch Division medical personnel with Alpha clearance." She held up her right hand, displaying a nearly invisible scar running along her palm, the characteristic marking of implanted biometric authentication technology. "I can provide access, but only with handler override confirmation." "Kane is missing," I asked, the pieces beginning to align. "Officially listed as killed in action during the final Umbra field operation. Unofficially." She hesitated. "Commander Kane's body was never recovered. His last authenticated communication came 3 days after his reported death, sent through encrypted channels directly to Phantom's neural interface system. The implications were staggering. A program director reportedly killed in action, somehow sending encrypted communications days after his death. Information important enough to embed in a specialized storage device concealed on a military working dog with enhanced capabilities. "What was the message?" I asked. "Unknown." The communication bypassed standard monitoring protocols, utilizing a direct handler asset channel developed specifically for compromised operational scenarios. What we do know is that immediately following receipt, Phantom executed unauthorized self-extraction from the secure facility where Umbra assets were being contained pending program termination. He disabled perimeter security systems, neutralized 2 guard positions without causing injuries, and disappeared, until he was found on Highway 16 18 months later. The timeline finally made sense. Phantom's appearance in Riverdale, his calculated behavior during multiple adoption attempts, his selection of a handler with specific qualifications. This wasn't random chance, but deliberate execution of contingency protocols established by Commander Kane. "Why me?" I asked the question that had lingered since our first encounter. "What makes me qualified to access classified information from a program I had no connection to?" Dr. Reyes studied me with renewed intensity. "That's what I'd very much like to understand, Captain. By all operational parameters, Phantom should have rejected you as unsuitable for his contingency protocols. Yet he not only accepted your handling, but apparently revealed the existence of the storage device, something he was programmed to do only for individuals meeting specific authentication criteria. The mystery deepened rather than clarified. Whatever connection existed between me and Commander Kane's final operational directives remained obscure, yet Phantom had recognized something in me that satisfied his programming parameters. The dog himself seemed to hold the key to understanding why I had been selected. The people searching for him, who are they? I asked. That depends on who found him first, Dr. Reyes replied cryptically. When Program Umbra was terminated, following congressional inquiry, its assets were distributed across multiple agencies. Some components were reassigned to DARPA for continued research. Others, particularly those with enhanced capabilities deemed too sensitive for civilian oversight, were transferred to specialized containment divisions. Her expression darkened, and some elements were targeted for complete decommissioning by security personnel concerned about potential disclosure of classified enhancement protocols. The euphemism wasn't lost on me. They were going to put him down. The official terminology was asset retirement, but yes, enhanced K9 units with neural augmentation were considered too sensitive to reallocate to conventional military applications. Their specialized capabilities represented potential security vulnerabilities if they fell into unauthorized hands. She glanced at Phantom with unmistakable respect. Echo 7 Delta was scheduled for priority retirement due to his advanced capabilities. Commander Kane apparently had other plans. The picture was becoming clearer. Kane, facing program termination that would result in Phantom's destruction, had implemented unauthorized contingency protocols, encoding critical information and programming his partner to seek specific handler parameters that would enable its eventual recovery. And now multiple agencies are trying to recover both Phantom and whatever information Kane embedded in that storage device, I concluded. Correct. Some with legitimate security concerns, others with more problematic motivations. Dr. Reyes checked her watch with deliberate movement. Our window is closing, Captain. I can provide biometric authentication to access that storage device, but I need handler override confirmation. Has Phantom displayed any activation sequences to you? Specific behavioral patterns that seem designed to convey authentication. Requirements? I considered the precise positioning Phantom had demonstrated in the manufacturing complex. The verification sequence followed by the deliberate paw placement over my heart. There was a sequence, 3 steps forward, quarter turn, sitting with head at specific angle. Recognition flashed in her eyes. The Monarch verification protocol, and your response. I recited the words from his collar tag, and his reaction. He approached directly, made deliberate eye contact, then placed his paw precisely on my chest. Here. I indicated the position over my heart, maintained contact with careful pressure control. Dr. Reyes's composed expression faltered momentarily, genuine surprise breaking through her professional demeanor. That's unexpected. The chest contact is a handler-specific recognition gesture. It shouldn't have been triggered by the collar inscription alone. She studied me with renewed intensity. Unless... Her voice trailed off as she reached a conclusion she seemed reluctant to articulate. Whatever connection she had identified between me and Commander Kane's contingency protocols clearly surprised her professional assessment. We need to proceed immediately, she said, her tone shifting to operational urgency. The storage device requires simultaneous biometric authentication from authorized medical personnel and handler confirmation via Phantom's neural interface. Are you willing to attempt access? The decision carried significant risk if Dr. Reyes wasn't what she claimed. or if the authentication process triggered security protocols, we could lose both the encrypted information and our freedom of movement. Yet Phantom's behavior suggested trust in her presence, and our options were rapidly diminishing as the surveillance team expanded their search parameters. "What do you think, partner?" I asked Phantom directly. His response was immediate and decisive. He positioned himself precisely between Dr. Reyes and me, creating the operational triangle necessary for simultaneous authentication. The deliberate placement conveyed more than agreement. It demonstrated confidence in the proposed course of action. "I guess that's our answer," I said, reaching into my pocket for the encrypted storage device. "Let's find out what Commander Kane thought was worth all this trouble." The Riverdale Public Library's computer lab wasn't designed for accessing top-secret military data, but its very ordinariness provided a form of operational security. No one would expect classified intelligence activities to unfold between the outdated desktop computers and faded motivational posters about the power of reading. Dr. Reyes produced a specialized adapter from her jacket pocket, a sleek carbon fiber device with no visible manufacturer markings. "Quantum interface bridge," she explained quietly. "It'll establish secure connection to the storage device without triggering standard detection protocols." She connected the adapter to the library, computer's USB port, then gestured for me to place the storage device on its surface. "The interface works through proximity rather than direct connection, minimizes trace signatures, and prevents data corruption if we need to disconnect quickly." As the adapter initiated its connection protocol, Dr. Reyes extended her right hand, palm down, above the device. "My biometric authentication will provide primary access clearance, but without handler confirmation via Phantom's neural interface, we'll only see file structures, not content." This was the moment of truth. If Dr. Reyes was indeed who she claimed to be, her implanted biometric signature would be recognized by the security protocols. If not, we'd likely trigger immediate alert to whoever was searching for us. Phantom shifted position slightly, moving closer to the adapter, his focus absolute. Something in his posture communicated not just alertness, but anticipation, as though he'd been waiting for precisely this moment since his mysterious appearance on Highway 16. The adapter emitted a soft blue light that pulsed once beneath Dr. Reyes's palm, then stabilized, confirmation of valid biometric signature. The library computer screen flickered, then displayed an elegant but minimalist interface, unlike any commercial operating system. Dark background with luminous blue text, file structures arranged in geometric patterns rather than conventional hierarchies. "Primary authentication confirmed," Dr. Reyes murmured. "Now we need handler verification through neural interface." She nodded toward Phantom, who maintained his focused attention on the adapter. For several seconds, nothing visible happened. No lights, no sounds, no movement. Then the computer screen shifted again, the geometric file structures expanding to reveal internal content pathways. The interface had accepted secondary authentication without any physical interaction. "Remarkable," Dr. Reyes whispered. "The neural transmission protocols are still fully functional, despite 18 months without maintenance or system updates. Kane's design work was truly exceptional." While her technical assessment focused on Phantom's capabilities, my attention was drawn to the content now becoming visible on screen. Mission logs, personnel files, medical records, and operational directives from Project Umbra. The sheer volume of classified information was staggering, representing what appeared to be a complete data extraction from the program's secure servers. "This is far more than contingency documentation," Dr. Reyes noted, her professional composure wavering slightly. "This is a comprehensive intelligence package, everything necessary to understand Umbra's full operational scope and technological applications." Kane wasn't just protecting Phantom, he was preserving the entire program knowledge base. As the files organized themselves on screen, a video file moved to prominent position, labeled simply Initial Briefing Contingency Handler. The file name triggered immediate recognition for Dr. Reyes. "That's Commander Kane's protocol designation for emergency handler transition," she explained. "He created contingency protocols for worst-case scenarios where Phantom might need to operate without his direct oversight. The file should contain specific instructions for whoever Phantom selected as replacement handler." My finger hovered over the trackpad, ready to open the file, when Phantom suddenly stiffened beside me. His attention shifted from the computer to the library's main entrance, posture transitioning smoothly from focused alertness to controlled readiness. Following his indicator, I spotted what had triggered his response. Two men in casual clothing entering the library, their movements conveying the unmistakable precision of professional operators conducting reconnaissance. Their eyes performed systematic scanning patterns of the interior space, hands positioned for quick access to concealed weapons. "We've got company," I murmured to Dr. Reyes, who had already registered the threat. "Security response team," she confirmed, voice barely audible. "Quantum interface detection protocols must have flagged our access attempt despite the adapters. Shielding. We need to move immediately." I discreetly ejected the storage device and disconnected the adapter, slipping both into my pocket while maintaining casual posture. Dr. Reyes stood slowly, positioning herself to block the operators. "Line of sight to our computer station. Service exit through the reference section," she directed, her calm tone belying the urgency of our situation. "Phantom can lead point. His tactical movement will draw less attention than ours." Without need for verbal command, Phantom understood. Our requirement, moving toward the reference section with deliberate casualness. A service dog simply navigating the library environment rather than a military asset executing evasion protocols. We followed at measured pace, maintaining separation to avoid appearing as a unified group. The operators had split up, one proceeding toward the computer lab, while the other positioned himself near the main exit. Standard containment approach. For a building with limited egress options. What they hadn't accounted for was Phantom's advanced spatial awareness and route selection capabilities. The service exit Dr. Reyes had identified was accessible through the reference section's staff area, a small workspace typically off-limits to patrons. As we approached, an elderly librarian emerged from behind the desk, clearly preparing to redirect us to public areas. Before she could speak, Dr. Reyes produced an ID card with practiced efficiency. "Library Association Quarterly Inspection," she stated with quiet authority. "We need to verify emergency exit compliance." The librarian hesitated, uncertain about the unscheduled inspection, but unwilling to challenge the confident presentation. "I wasn't informed of any inspection today." "Last-minute scheduling change," Dr. Reyes explained smoothly. "We'll only need access for a moment to confirm the exit is unobstructed and properly marked." While this exchange unfolded, I monitored the operators' positions, using reflected surfaces on the library shelving. The first man had reached our vacated computer station and was examining it with controlled urgency. The second maintained his position at the main entrance, hand pressed to his ear in the characteristic gesture of someone receiving communications through a concealed earpiece. The librarian finally relented, unlocking the staff area with a resignation that suggested this wasn't the first bureaucratic inconvenience she'd endured. "The emergency exit is through the break room. It's alarmed, so please don't open it unless absolutely necessary." As soon as she returned to her desk, we moved swiftly through the staff area, Phantom taking lead position as we navigated past cluttered workstations and overflowing book carts. The emergency exit was exactly where expected, a metal door with standard push bar connected to the building's alarm system via magnetic contacts on the frame. The alarm will alert them to our exit vector, I noted, assessing our limited options. Dr. Reyes was already examining the alarm connection with practiced efficiency. Standard commercial system, nothing specialized. She reached into her pocket and produced a small electronic device approximately the size of a USB drive. Electromagnetic pulse generator, limited range but effective for temporary system disruption. She positioned the device near the alarm contacts and activated it with a discreet button press. A barely audible high-pitched tone indicated operational status. We have approximately 15 seconds before the system registers connection failure and triggers secondary alert protocols. The timing was precise. We pushed through the emergency exit exactly 14 seconds after EMP activation, emerging into a narrow alley behind the library building. No alarm sounded, giving us momentary advantage as we moved quickly toward the alley's eastern exit, away from the main street where additional operators might be positioned. They'll detect our exit path within 2 minutes, Dr. Reyes stated, as we maintained rapid but controlled movement. We need immediate transportation and secure location to review the data. My mind raced through limited options. My apartment was compromised. Public transportation would expose us to surveillance cameras. Stolen vehicles would trigger law enforcement response. We needed an ally with resources and discretion, someone with no obvious connection to either my military background or Project Umbra. As if sensing my strategic analysis, Phantom suddenly changed direction, leading us down a side passage between commercial buildings. His confident movement suggested not random evasion, but purposeful navigation towards specific destination. Dr. Reyes and I followed his lead, trusting his enhanced capabilities and environmental awareness. The passage opened into a small courtyard, behind Riverdale's once grand Imperial Theatre, now operating as a discount cinema showing second-run films. The theatre's loading dock stood open, with a single employee, a young man with multicolored hair and extensive tattoos, sorting through supply deliveries. Phantom approached directly, maintaining non-threatening posture, while clearly communicating intentional engagement. The young man looked up, his initial surprise quickly transforming into recognition as he spotted Phantom. "Holy shit!" he exclaimed, setting down the box he'd been carrying. "Is that... No way!" Dr. Reyes and I exchanged questioning glances, both caught off guard by this unexpected development. The young man moved forward, crouching to Phantom's level with an expression of astonished delight. "Phantom? Dude, where have you been?" He looked up at me with undisguised curiosity. "You must be the guy from the shelter, right? The one who finally adopted him." The revelation hit me with startling force. Phantom had deliberately led us to someone who recognized him, someone unconnected to official channels or military operations, an unexpected ally hiding in plain sight. "You know this dog?" I asked, maintaining casual tone despite our urgent circumstances. "Know him? Man, I've been looking for him for almost 2 years. The young man extended his hand. "I'm Ryan Cortez. I used to volunteer at the Veterans Rehabilitation Center, where Phantom was part of the therapy program before." Well, before everything went sideways. Dr. Reyes recovered her composure quickly, professional assessment replacing momentary surprise. "Mr. Cortez, I'm Dr. Reyes, veterinary consultant. We're currently in a somewhat urgent situation involving Phantom's previous owners attempting to reclaim him despite legal adoption. Would you be willing to assist us temporarily?" Ryan's expression hardened with unexpected determination. "Previous owners? You mean the suits who showed up claiming government authority? Those guys can go straight to hell. They're the ones who tried to remove all the therapy dogs from the program without explanation." He gestured toward the theater's rear entrance. "Come inside. My manager's cool. She lets me bring rescues in through the back when they need temporary housing." As Ryan led us through the service entrance into the theater's labyrinthine back corridors, Phantom maintained close positioning, his behavior suggesting familiarity with both the environment and our unexpected ally. The theater's aged architecture offered numerous concealment options: storage rooms, projection booths, maintenance areas inaccessible to casual observation. Ryan guided us to a converted office space filled with dog beds, water bowls, and supplies. "Welcome to Underground Railroad for abandoned service dogs," he announced with modest pride. "I started it after the government types shut down the VA therapy program and tried to confiscate all the working dogs. Managed to help rehome 6 of them with their veteran partners, but Phantom disappeared before I could get to him. I've been checking the shelters weekly ever since." The setup was impressive, a hidden sanctuary for service animals operated completely beneath official radar by someone whose appearance and occupation would never trigger surveillance attention. The perfect, unexpected ally for our current circumstances. "You've been running an unauthorized rehoming network for military working dogs?" Dr. Reyes asked, her tone balanced between professional concern and genuine admiration. "Not just military. Dogs. Any service animal at risk of being separated from the people they help," Ryan clarified. "But yeah, especially the ones from that special program at the VA center. Those dogs had some kind of advanced training, unlike anything I'd seen before." He looked at Phantom with obvious respect. "Especially this guy. The veterans called him the Professor because he seemed to understand everything happening around him." The nickname confirmed Phantom's exceptional capabilities had been apparent even in therapeutic contexts, without his full operational parameters being activated. His selection of Ryan as our immediate resource demonstrated strategic thinking beyond conventional parameters, identifying an ally whose connection to him existed completely outside official records. "Ryan, we need secure space to review some information regarding Phantom's background," I explained, careful to avoid classified terminology, "and possibly transportation options that won't appear in predictable patterns." "Say no more," Ryan replied with surprising seriousness. "Projection Booth 3 is completely offline for equipment upgrades. No camera coverage, limited access, soundproofed for equipment noise. And my sister's catering truck is parked out back if you need wheels. Food delivery vehicles are practically invisible in urban environments. Nobody pays attention to them." His casual expertise in counter-surveillance techniques seemed incongruous with his appearance, until I noticed the subtle indicators I'd initially overlooked. The disciplined awareness beneath his relaxed demeanor, the precise scanning patterns of his eyes, the controlled economy of his movements despite appearing casual. "You have military background," I stated rather than asked. Ryan's expression shifted slightly, revealing more composed assessment beneath his informal presentation. "Force recon. 2 tours in Syria before medical discharge. Found civilian readjustment. Challenging until I started volunteering with the therapy dog program." He shrugged. "The multicolor hair and tattoos help me blend into civilian life better than standard veteran presentation. People see what they expect to see." The strategic depth of Phantom's selection became increasingly clear. He had identified not just any friendly contact, but a former special operations veteran with applicable skills, existing emotional connection to him, and completely separate operational profile from anyone connected to Project Umbra. As Ryan led us toward the projection booth, I felt the weight of the encrypted storage device in my pocket and the responsibility it represented. Commander Kane had entrusted Phantom with critical information, programming him to identify appropriate resources for contingency operation. The precision with which the dog had executed this directive, finding me as primary handler, then leading, Us to Ryan as support operative demonstrated strategic planning capabilities far beyond conventional parameters. Whatever secrets awaited us in that initial briefing video, we now had unexpected but formidable alliance to help navigate the challenges ahead. A former special operations veteran, a military medical specialist, a captain with ranger training, and one extraordinary dog with capabilities that continued to defy conventional explanation. Projection Booth 3 of the Imperial Theatre existed in a strange liminal space between past and present. Vintage carbon arc projectors stood alongside modern digital equipment, creating a technological timeline spanning nearly a century of cinema history. The booth's walls were covered with faded movie posters and handwritten notes from generations of projectionists who had occupied this hidden perch above the audience. Ryan secured the heavy door behind us, engaging multiple locks with practiced efficiency. This room is completely isolated from the theater's main electrical and network systems, he explained, originally designed that way to prevent projection equipment from interfering with sound systems. Now, it makes a perfect skiff. His casual use of the military acronym for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility revealed more of his background. Force. Recon operators received extensive training in secure communications and intelligence handling, skills that had apparently transferred to his civilian life protecting service animals. There's a standalone system in the back corner, Ryan continued, gesturing toward a desktop computer positioned away from any windows or doors. No network connection, dedicated power supply. I use it for managing rehoming records that need to stay off official channels. Dr. Reyes nodded with professional approval. Perfect for our needs. Captain Lawson, shall we proceed with examining the contents of Commander Kane's briefing? I removed the storage device and quantum interface adapter from my pocket, suddenly hesitant as the reality of our situation crystallized. Whatever information Commander Kane had entrusted to Phantom, accessing it would irrevocably commit us to involvement with classified operations that had already attracted professional pursuit teams. Once we viewed the briefing, there would be no claiming ignorance or deniability. Phantom seemed to sense my hesitation, moving to sit precisely at my side, not leaning or seeking contact, but establishing unmistakable partnership positioning. His amber eyes met mine with that uncanny intelligence, communicating with absolute clarity. This is the mission. We proceed together. Let's see what Commander Kane thought was worth all this trouble, I said, connecting the devices to Ryan's standalone system. The quantum interface initialized more quickly this time, the specialized adapter recognizing the storage device's encryption patterns. Dr. Reyes provided her biometric authentication, palm hovering above the interface, while Phantom maintained focused attention that presumably activated his neural transmission protocols. The screen displayed the same elegant blue interface we'd seen briefly at the library, file structures arranged in geometric patterns. Without hesitation, I selected the Initial Briefing Contingency Handler video file. The screen darkened momentarily, then resolved to show a man in his early 40s with close-cropped dark hair and the intense focus characteristic of special operations personnel. He wore no uniform or insignia, but his military bearing was unmistakable. A small identifier in the corner of the frame read, CDR Daniel Kane, Umbra Director, T-12 hours. If you're viewing this briefing, two things have happened, Kane began without preamble. First, Phantom has selected you as his contingency handler based on parameters I've programmed into his neural interface system. Second, Project Umbra has been compromised to the point where emergency protocols have been activated. Kane's direct address created the uncanny sensation that he was speaking specifically to me rather than creating a generic contingency briefing. His eyes seemed to look directly through the screen, assessing and evaluating even through the recorded medium. Phantom is not simply a military working dog. He represents the culmination of Project Umbra's primary research directive, the development of autonomous decision-making capabilities in enhanced biological assets. While other programs focused on creating technology to extend human capabilities, Umbra approached the challenge from the opposite direction, enhancing animal intelligence and decision-making to approach human cognitive parameters while maintaining their superior sensory capabilities. The clinical description didn't capture the extraordinary being sitting beside me, watching Kane's image with obvious recognition and what appeared to be genuine emotional connection. The neural augmentation technology implemented in Echo 7 Delta Phantom represents 5 years of breakthrough research combining synthetic neural pathways, quantum processing interfaces, and adapted brain-computer integration protocols. In simple terms, Phantom possesses cognitive capabilities that bridge the gap between canine and human intelligence, with specialized enhancements in tactical assessment, pattern recognition, and strategic planning. Kane paused, his professional demeanor briefly softening. He's also the finest partner I've ever worked with. Loyal, brave, and possessed of an intelligence that sometimes makes me wonder who's really in charge of our operations. The affection in Kane's voice was unmistakable, explaining the deep bond referenced in Phantom's collar inscription. This wasn't merely handler and asset, but a genuine partnership based on mutual respect. Project Umbra was designed with the best intentions, creating enhanced capabilities that could reduce human casualties in high-risk operations by deploying assets with superior sensory capabilities and accelerated decision-making processes. The initial results exceeded all expectations. Phantom and the other enhanced assets demonstrated unprecedented effectiveness in field operations, particularly in hostage recovery and counter-terrorism applications. Kane's expression darkened, the shift subtle but unmistakable to anyone trained to read micro-expressions. However, as with many advanced programs, certain elements within oversight divisions began exploring applications beyond the original ethical parameters. Specifically, the Monarch Division, originally established to manage enhanced assets deployment, began developing protocols for autonomous termination operations. Assets like Phantom would be programmed to identify and eliminate designated targets without human authorization or oversight. The implications were chilling. Weaponized animals with near-human intelligence operating independently to execute lethal operations without direct human control or accountability. The ethical boundaries being crossed extended well beyond conventional military research. I initiated shutdown protocols when these unauthorized applications were implemented without proper ethical review or congressional oversight. My objections were officially noted, then effectively buried in classification. Restrictions. When I threatened to take my concerns to external oversight committees, I was removed from operational control and placed on administrative leave pending security review. Kane leaned closer to the camera, his intensity magnifying. That's when I discovered something far more disturbing than unauthorized deployment protocols. Medical data from the enhanced assets revealed fundamental flaws in the neural integration technology, degradation patterns that would ultimately lead to systematic failure of the synthetic pathways. In simple terms, the enhancements would eventually kill the assets through cascading neural collapse. This information was identified in early testing, but deliberately concealed to maintain program funding and development timelines. Dr. Reyes inhaled sharply, her professional composure cracking at this revelation. They knew, she whispered, the integration stability issues we were documenting. They already knew the probable outcomes. Kane continued, unaware of our real-time reactions. I implemented emergency extraction protocols for all enhanced assets under my command, with particular focus on Phantom, whose advanced enhancements made him most vulnerable to accelerated degradation. However, containment teams intercepted our movement before full extraction could be completed. Official reports will indicate that I was killed during attempted unauthorized removal of classified assets. These reports are partially accurate. I sustained critical injuries during the extraction operation, but managed to complete Phantom's programming for contingency deployment. The timeline crystallized. Kane, mortally wounded, had programmed Phantom's final instructions and sent him away from the containment teams, creating the circumstances that eventually led to his appearance on Highway 16. If you're seeing this, briefing. Phantom has identified you as meeting the specific parameters I programmed for contingency handler selection. Military background with appropriate security clearance levels. Physical capabilities matching operational requirements, and most importantly, psychological profile indicating ethical priorities that would reject autonomous termination protocols. In simpler terms, he's found someone I would trust with his life and with the information contained in this data package. The realization struck with unexpected force. Phantom hadn't selected me randomly or out of desperation. His advanced cognitive systems had identified specific qualities that matched Kane's program parameters. Among all the potential handlers he had encountered during his multiple adoption attempts, something in my background, behavior, or psychological profile had activated his contingency protocols. The data package contains complete documentation of Project Umbra's research, including the classified medical reports detailing neural degradation patterns and potential countermeasures that were suppressed by program administration. Most critically, it contains Dr. Elena Reyes's experimental protocol for stabilizing the synthetic neural pathways through recalibrated quantum interface adjustments, a procedure that was rejected by Monarch Division as too resource-intensive, despite its potential to prevent terminal degradation. Dr. Reyes straightened beside me, her eyes widening with professional recognition. My stabilization protocol, they rejected it as cost-prohibitive, even though testing showed 87% effectiveness in preventing cascade failure. I was told the research was discontinued due to inconclusive results. Kane's recorded briefing continued with military precision. Your primary mission objectives are threefold. First, secure Dr. Elena Reyes's assistance in implementing the stabilization protocol for Phantom. His enhanced neural pathways are already showing early degradation indicators that will accelerate without intervention. Second, deliver the complete data package to Brigadier General Sandra Morrison at Pentagon's Special Oversight Division. She has the security clearance and ethical backbone to ensure proper review of Umbra's unauthorized applications. Third, protect Phantom from recapture by Monarch Division assets who have been tasked with retrieving all enhanced operators and eliminating witnesses to program violations. The mission parameters were clear but daunting. Medical intervention requiring classified technology, contact with high-level military personnel, and ongoing evasion of professional pursuit teams with virtually unlimited resources. Time constraints. Prevent more detailed briefing, Kane concluded, his voice taking on an urgency that suggested his injuries were worsening during the recording. Phantom's neural interface contains additional operational directives that will activate in specific circumstances. Trust his judgment. His cognitive enhancements include strategic assessment capabilities that sometimes exceed human analysis, particularly under pressure conditions. Kane's expression softened again, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine emotion. One final note to whoever Phantom has selected. The words on his collar. Through shadows we walk together. Remember your promise. where originally my commitment to him when his enhancements were first activated and he experienced the disorientation of expanded consciousness. I promised that whatever changes he experienced, whatever shadows we faced, we would navigate them together. Kane paused, regaining composure with visible effort. I've kept that promise as long as possible. Now I'm asking you to continue it, not just for Phantom's sake, but because what he carries in his enhanced mind represents both extraordinary risk and unprecedented potential for the future of human-animal partnership. The video ended abruptly, Kane's image freezing momentarily before the screen returned to the file directory. The silence that followed felt weighted with the responsibility Kane had transferred through his recorded briefing. Phantom remained perfectly still beside me, his attention fixed on the screen where his original handler's image had been displayed. Something in his posture communicated not just recognition, but grief, a response too complex for conventional animal behavior, but perfectly aligned with Kane's description of his enhanced cognitive capabilities. Neural degradation, Dr. Reyes finally said, breaking the silence. The stabilization protocol requires specialized equipment from the Umbra Medical Facility. Most components can be adapted from commercial technology, but the quantum calibration system is proprietary military development. Ryan, who had remained respectfully quiet during the briefing, stepped forward. I might have a solution for that. The veterinarian who worked with the therapy dog program had equipment transferred from military research when the program was established. When everything was shut down, certain items weren't included in the official inventory during decommissioning. He kept them in a storage unit outside official channels, said they were too valuable to let bureaucrats mothball them. The revelation created another piece in the emerging pattern. Phantom hadn't just led us to Ryan for immediate tactical support, but for his connections to resources specifically relevant to Kane's mission parameters. The strategic depth of his contingency planning demonstrated exactly the advanced cognitive capabilities Kane had described. I looked down at Phantom, seeing him with new understanding, not just an exceptional military working dog, but a being straddling the boundary between animal and human intelligence, carrying both the extraordinary gifts and profound burden of his enhancements. The degradation Kane had described explained the occasional tremors I'd observed in Phantom's movements during periods of extended exertion, early indicators of the neural pathway instability that would eventually prove fatal. Without intervention. Well, I said, meeting Phantom's intelligent gaze directly, looks like we have our mission parameters. Step 1. Implement the stabilization protocol to ensure your neural pathways remain intact. Step 2. Deliver Kane's evidence to the proper authorities. Step 3. Stay ahead of whoever's trying to find us long enough to accomplish objectives. 1 and 2. Phantom's response was subtle but unmistakable, a slight relaxation of tension, a deeper connection in his gaze, the faintest pressure of his shoulder against my leg. Not seeking reassurance, but offering partnership. Through his advanced cognition, he understood precisely what we faced, the risks involved, and the importance of our success not just for his survival, but for proper accountability regarding Project Umbra's ethical violations. I'm in, Ryan stated without hesitation. My connections can get us to the storage unit and provide transportation options that won't appear in standard search patterns. The stabilization protocol is complex, but implementable with appropriate equipment, Dr. Reyes added. Assuming we can access the components your veterinarian friend preserved, I can perform the procedure. It will require approximately 6 hours of uninterrupted work in a sterile environment with stable power supply. The pieces were aligning. Unexpected allies providing critical resources, specialized knowledge becoming available exactly when needed, strategic pathways emerging from seemingly random connections. None of it was coincidental. Phantom's enhanced Cognitive systems had been identifying and evaluating potential resources since his escape from containment, creating the precise circumstances necessary for mission completion. The depth of planning, the strategic foresight, the integration of seemingly unconnected elements into coherent operational structure. These weren't lucky accidents, but the product of truly extraordinary intelligence working methodically toward specific objectives. Kane's description had been accurate. Phantom's cognitive capabilities sometimes exceeded human strategic assessment, particularly under pressure conditions. Commander Kane chose the right partner for his final mission, I said quietly to Phantom, and you chose the right contingency team to help you complete it. The bond between us, handler and enhanced asset, soldier and soldier, partner and impartner, deepened with shared purpose and mutual respect. Whatever shadows lay ahead, we would navigate them together. The evening brought new dimensions to our unlikely alliance as we prepared for the complex operation ahead. Ryan transformed the theater's employee break room into a planning center, spreading maps across the battered table and establishing secure communications through a collection of prepaid phones. Dr. Reyes inventoried medical supplies, creating detailed lists of additional equipment we would need to successfully implement the neural stabilization protocol. Throughout these preparations, Phantom maintained vigilant watch over our activities, his enhanced cognition evident in the way he tracked conversations and occasionally repositioned himself near relevant maps or equipment lists. As the immediate tactical planning progressed, I found myself withdrawing slightly, processing the revelations from Commander Kane's briefing. The weight of responsibility settled more heavily with each passing hour, not just for Phantom's survival, but for the ethical implications of Project Umbra's unauthorized applications. The concept of enhanced animals programmed for autonomous termination operations represented a profound moral threshold being crossed without proper oversight or accountability. Dr. Reyes noticed my contemplative silence and joined me at the small table in the corner where I had retreated with a cup of coffee. The formality that had characterized her earlier interactions had softened, revealing more of the person beneath the professional demeanor. "You're wondering if you're qualified for this," she said. "Not a question, but an observation. Wondering why Phantom selected you when you had no prior connection to Project Umbra or Commander Kane." I nodded, grateful for her directness. Kane said Phantom would identify someone with specific parameters: military background, appropriate, physical capabilities, ethical priorities that would reject autonomous termination protocols. But there must be thousands of veterans who would meet those criteria. Why me specifically? Dr. Reyes considered the question carefully. The selection algorithms integrated into Phantom's neural enhancements are significantly more sophisticated than simple parameter matching. They include pattern recognition capabilities that identify subtle behavioral indicators most humans wouldn't consciously register. "What kind of indicators?" I asked. "Command presence balanced with ethical boundaries, decision-making patterns that prioritize protection of vulnerable assets, even at personal risk, consistency between stated principles and observable actions." She smiled slightly. In less technical terms, Phantom was programmed to recognize integrity and compassion alongside tactical capability. Commander Kane believed those combined qualities were rarer than pure operational skills. The explanation made logical sense but felt incomplete, a technical description missing some essential element. Dr. Reyes seemed to recognize this, her expression shifting as she reached a decision about sharing additional information. "There's something about Commander Kane you should know," she said, lowering her voice despite our relative privacy. "Something not included in official records or his contingency briefing." I waited, sensing the importance of what would follow. Daniel, Kane was not originally military, she began. Before his recruitment into specialized operations, he was a search and rescue coordinator for wilderness emergencies in Alaska. His exceptional planning capabilities and decision-making under extreme conditions attracted military attention, leading to his unconventional mid-career transition into special operations. This background diverged significantly from typical military career progression, explaining some of Kane's unique approaches to asset management and ethical frameworks. During his civilian career, Kane pioneered innovative training methodologies for search and rescue dogs, focusing on developing their autonomous decision-making capabilities rather than strict obedience to commands. His techniques produced working dogs that could make independent assessments when separated from handlers, choosing search patterns based on environmental conditions, prioritizing resource allocation during multiple victim scenarios, even modifying trained responses when standard approaches proved ineffective. The connection was becoming clearer. Kane's civilian background had shaped his approach to Project Umbra, viewing enhanced animals as partners rather than tools, focusing on autonomous capabilities rather than directed control. When Kane was recruited for Project Umbra, he brought this philosophy with him, the belief that the most effective working animals were those allowed to develop their natural intelligence rather than having it constrained by rigid training protocols. While other program directors focused on creating assets that would precisely execute program directives, Kane developed training methodologies that encouraged adaptive problem-solving and independent assessment, which explains Phantom's extraordinary capabilities. I concluded. He wasn't just programmed with specific responses, but trained to think strategically. Exactly. When neural enhancement technology became available, Kane insisted on implementation, approaches that would amplify existing cognitive abilities, rather than overriding them with external control systems. The result was an enhanced asset, with unprecedented autonomy and decision-making capabilities. Dr. Reyes paused, choosing her next words carefully. This approach created conflict within the program administration, particularly when Kane objected to applications that would remove ethical decision-making from the enhancement protocols. The picture was becoming clearer. Kane's insistence on maintaining ethical frameworks within the enhancement process had directly conflicted with Monarch Division's development of autonomous termination capabilities. His objections hadn't been merely procedural, but fundamental to his understanding of proper relationship between humans and the enhanced animals under their care. "What does this have to do with Phantom selecting me?" I asked, still missing the connection between Kane's background and my involvement. Dr. Reyes's expression softened further. Before he was recruited for special operations, before he pioneered innovative training methods for search and rescue, Daniel Kane was a veteran struggling with post-deployment reintegration. His discharge paperwork cited adjustment difficulties, hypervigilance, symptoms consistent with combat-related trauma. "Sound familiar, Captain Lawson?" The parallel was unmistakable, though my own challenges with civilian reintegration were hardly unique among veterans. Kane found his path forward through connection with working dogs, their uncomplicated honesty, their ability to remain present in challenging circumstances, their capacity for partnership without judgment. His subsequent career and eventual leadership of Project Umbra grew from that healing connection. Understanding began to dawn. "You're saying Phantom wasn't just following parameter-matching protocols when he selected me. He was identifying a specific life trajectory, someone whose background mirrored Kane's own path. More precisely, someone with the potential to follow a similar transformative journey," Dr. Reyes clarified. "The neural enhancement algorithms included pattern recognition for growth potential, not just existing capabilities. Phantom wasn't selecting a finished product but someone with capacity for development through partnership, exactly as Kane himself had experienced. The implication was both humbling and inspiring. Phantom had recognized in me not just who I was, but who I might become through our connection. The enhanced cognitive systems Kane had developed allowed for assessment of potential rather than merely current capabilities. That's why none of the previous adoption attempts succeeded, I realized. He wasn't just rejecting unsuitable handlers. He was waiting for someone with specific development potential. Correct, and that waiting period came with significant risk. The neural degradation patterns Kane identified in his briefing progress more rapidly during periods of isolation and stress. Phantom sacrificed his own well-being to ensure proper handler selection, knowing the stabilization protocol would become progressively more difficult to implement successfully with each passing month. The sacrifice implicit in that decision, an enhanced being consciously accepting physical deterioration to ensure mission integrity, demonstrated exactly the ethical framework Kane had insisted on maintaining within the enhancement protocols. Phantom hadn't just been programmed with strategic capabilities, but with values that guided their application. "There's something else you should understand," Dr. Reyes continued. "The neural enhancement technology doesn't create capabilities in isolation from the animal's fundamental character. It amplifies and accelerates what already exists." Phantom's exceptional strategic thinking, his ability to identify appropriate resources and create operational pathways, these aren't artificial impositions, but extensions of his natural intelligence and temperament. "You're saying the enhancement doesn't change who he is, just expands what he can do with who he is," I summarized. "Precisely, which is why Kane was so adamant about proper selection of candidates for enhancement. The baseline character of the animal determines how the enhanced capabilities will be expressed. Phantom was exceptional before his enhancements. The technology simply gave him tools to manifest that exceptional nature more fully." The insight shifted my understanding of our partnership fundamentally. Phantom wasn't an artificial intelligence in canine form, but a naturally extraordinary being whose capabilities had been amplified beyond normal parameters. His decisions, including his selection of me as contingency handler, emerged from genuine character rather than programmed directives. As our conversation concluded, Ryan approached with updates on transportation arrangements and security preparations for accessing the stored medical equipment. Dr. Reyes excused herself to continue inventory assessment, leaving me alone with my thoughts about the nature of the partnership forming between Phantom and me. Phantom himself appeared beside me moments later, his movement silent despite the weight of his tactical harness. He positioned himself at perfect heel orientation, not seeking attention but establishing connection. When I looked down, his intelligent gaze met mine with a depth of understanding that transcended species barriers. Recognition between two beings navigating similar paths of recovery and purpose. In that moment of connection, something shifted in my perception of our situation. What had initially felt like an unwanted complication in my carefully isolated existence now revealed itself as a pathway toward renewal. Kane had found his redemption through partnership with working dogs, ultimately channeling that connection into extraordinary work that balanced innovation with ethical boundaries. Perhaps Phantom's selection of me wasn't merely about mission parameters, but about offering similar opportunity for transformation. The realization brought unexpected clarity regarding our next steps. The mission objectives Kane had outlined, implementing the stabilization protocol, delivering evidence of program violations, protecting Phantom from recapture, weren't separate from my own recovery, but potentially integral to it. Purpose, connection, ethical challenge, requiring full engagement. These were precisely the elements missing from the isolated existence I'd constructed since medical discharge. "You knew what you were doing when you picked me, didn't you?" I said quietly to Phantom. "You weren't just finding a handler, you were offering a path forward." His response was subtle but unmistakable, a slight shift that brought his shoulder against my leg, establishing physical connection that affirmed our partnership. Not handler and asset, not even human and dog, but two beings choosing to walk together through whatever challenges lay ahead. When Ryan returned with finalized transportation plans for accessing the storage unit containing critical medical equipment, he found us ready, Phantom alert and focused, me standing with renewed determination and clarity of purpose. The mission. Parameters hadn't changed. The risks remained significant, but my relationship to them had transformed fundamentally. "Everyone ready to move out in 30 minutes?" Ryan asked, noting the shift in my demeanor with professional assessment. "We're ready," I confirmed, speaking for both Phantom and myself. Time to implement Commander Kane's mission objectives. As we prepared for departure, loading essential supplies and communications equipment into Ryan's sister's catering truck, I observed Phantom's movements with new appreciation. Every action, every positional choice, every assessment pattern reflected both his enhanced capabilities and his fundamental character, courage balanced with caution, intelligence directed by ethical discernment, strategic thinking informed by loyalty and commitment. Dr. Reyes had been right. The enhancement technology hadn't created Phantom's exceptional nature, but amplified what already existed, and Kane had been right to trust that enhanced nature, with choices that would shape both his future and the proper accountability for Project Umbra's ethical violations. Whatever challenges we would face in the hours ahead, we would navigate them not as handler directing asset, but as partners combining complementary capabilities. Kane's promise, inscribed on Phantom's collar and now transferred to our partnership, would guide our path through shadows we walked together. No matter how dark those shadows might become, the journey would be shared. The realization transformed my perspective from reluctant participant to committed partner, not just in completing Kane's mission objectives, but in honoring the deeper purpose behind them, ensuring that extraordinary capabilities remained guided by ethical boundaries, that innovation served protection rather than exploitation, that promises made would be kept despite institutional pressures to abandon them. Phantom's selection of me hadn't been random coincidence, but deliberate recognition of shared values and complementary capabilities. In trusting that recognition, I found unexpected purpose in a journey I'd never anticipated, protecting an extraordinary being who, in his own way, was offering protection and renewal in return. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.